everyone. I think we are now live. Welcome, everyone, to the fifth of six live panels in this fantastic 24-hour event celebrating the 2020 milestone of the Bonn Challenge and the progress being made on restoration around the world. My name is Carol Saint Laurent. I'm wearing a few different hats today. I'm your host and moderator. I'm Deputy Director of the IUCN Forest Conservation Program. I'm also head of the Bonn Challenge Secretariat and coordinator of the Global Partnership on Forest Landscape Restoration. And I will be leading you through a session on Bonn Challenge Flashback, the early seeds of inspiration and commitment. So we're about 16 hours into our 24 hours of programming. I'm sure that many of you, like me, have been impressed by the incredible diversity of restoration initiatives we've seen in that time, that restoration is truly happening everywhere in lots of different ways. We've heard voices from youth. We had a very dynamic panel on gender and how gender plays into forest landscape restoration. We've heard about leadership, what it takes to catalyze an initiative like the Bonn Challenge, and where it fits into initiatives moving forward like the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. I think all of that makes everyone better equipped to dive in even further, even harder with implementation as we move in forward. So this session is a little bit different now. We're gonna have, after hearing what's happening in lots of places and about all the key issues, we're gonna have a little check-in with some of the originators of forest landscape restoration and the Bonn Challenge and get their perspectives on where we started from and where we're going, what it looks like to them now. Joining me today, we have Horst Freiberg, formerly of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, co-founder of the Bonn Challenge. We have Stuart McGuinness, Global Director, Nature-Based Solutions of IUCN, and also co-creator with Bill Jackson of the whole concept of forest landscape restoration. We have Jean-Pierre Mugabo, Director General, Rwanda Forestry Authority, the first country to announce a Bonn Challenge pledge. And Vicki Christensen, Chief of the US Forest Service. The Forest Service was also an early adopter and a huge leader early on. So with that, let's jump into our questions. Horst, let's have a go with you first. You were there from the start, you know, when we had this crazy idea of this Bonn Challenge of putting a target on forest landscape restoration. How did you personally get involved?
Well, this was a very nice, I think, story. I was just 6 months in my position as head of division of the forest division in BMU. And when I got a phone call from outside and our call center called me, it was June or July, something like that, in 2009. And the call center asked me, look, Mr. Freiberg, there's somebody online who's asking for forests. Is it right that I link him with you? I said, well, let's do it. And Stuart was on phone, calling, looking, not I would say desperately, but he was looking for somebody from the German government, starting with BMU, for a meeting in London with the London Challenge in November the same year, looking for somebody from the German government saying, look, I'm looking for somebody on forest. He was starting to explain, look, we are doing some restoration. Have you heard about restoration? Look, he said 2 sentences, I think, I remember. I said, look, my own professional history in Chile, Paraguay, Guatemala, I was doing something very similar to what you are asking me. You are at the right place. You don't need to phone or call anybody else outside BMU. We go ahead. And so this was the moment when we both, and our ministry, with at that time, Parliamentary State Secretary Heinesse, participated in the London Challenge. This was the birthday, practically, of our involvement, when in London, this fantastic 1 billion hectare map of opportunities for forest landscape restoration was presented by the GPFLR, by the IUCN and World Resource Institute. And this was practically the basis for the next step when we waited for the CBD Conference of the Parties in 2010 in Nagoya with the Aichi Target 15. the plus of the RED Plus mechanism in Cancun, few months later, the plus enhancement of carbon stocks. And this was the combination we then, you said it, we brought together and created in Bonn in 2011, in September, exactly on the 2nd. This idea, let's proclaim, let's present by the group of these high-level participants a goal, 150 million hectares by 2020, because it was linked to Aichi, to the CBD benefit sharing, to all these, what CBD is doing, and climate change, carbon dioxide. And 2020 was the Aichi target of finalizing, and the map was the basis. What came out of this was fantastic, unexpected for all of us, I think. All we were clapping on our shoulders after Bonn in the Carmea Grand Hotel, saying, look, wonderful event, but nobody, definitely nobody, expected in 2011 that this would take off in this way. And we got in 2015 with the second Bonn challenge also, Rwanda was in the first, El Salvador was in the first Bonn challenge participating ministers. But in the second in Bonn in 2015, we had Lina Pohl, the minister from El Salvador, who first time said, look, I will do a regional conference in El Salvador. Rwanda followed, and we got now 4 regional policy conferences in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Central Asia, Caucasus. And Lina Pohl was also very decisive for the future. She was also the country who really pushed in her region forest landscape restoration. And she was, at the end of the day, also the responsible minister for presenting the idea of a decade on ecosystem restoration. And I think what I take back from all this is that at that time, there was a big study called the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, done by Pavan Shukdev. And all those who ask me about the Bonn challenge, I say, look, I follow completely what Pavan Shukdev at that time said. Bonn challenge or restoration is about restoration of ecosystem services. And this, I think, is the most important thing. It includes people on the ground, local communities, etc., etc. And also, last point is, I think, who is working with the Bonn challenge and doing restoration, he also, on the same time, it's the same side of the coin, he also is saying, yes, I also conserve or protect or wisely manage the remaining forest areas I still have in my country. I think both things are on the same coin of the medal. But I think the Bonn challenge is about ecosystem service restoration, which includes people. I think this is the most important message I got from all these exercises. And this was the reason why I think this is also one of the success stories, we never created technical framework around the Bonn challenge. We left it into the hands of the people to do a step forward to improve ecosystem services. This is and it's a wonderful, fantastic, I think, global initiative, which we created.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing that perspective. If there's time, I might come back to you with another question, but let me go over to Stuart. So Stuart, by the time you picked up the phone and you hit Horst accidentally, providentially that day, you were armed with the forest landscape restoration approach and a big idea for the Bonn challenge. What was the thinking behind the creation of the concept of forest landscape restoration, and what role do you think the Bonn challenge played in advancing that? I think you're muted.
Beg your pardon. Thank you for the reminder. So thanks for the question, Carol. My own journey with forest landscape restoration started actually almost 35 years to the day in Tanzania, and I was working on community forestry issues. But by the late 1990s, tree planting and restoration really looked as if they were falling out of vogue internationally. And there was a lot of attention on the protection of forests. There was a lot of attention on sustainably managing working forests. And these were things that were dominating international policy and the national agenda. And where tree planting was discussed, it usually was discussed in the terms of exotic plantations and all the controversies that came along with that. Now, I like to feel that forest landscape restoration really was born in the field, because there was a small group of colleagues from IUCN and WWF who we just felt you couldn't forget about degraded lands and the livelihoods of people who relied on degraded lands and degraded forests, and that also had to be part of this global vision for forests. So I just actually returned from 5 years working in Costa Rica. My colleague, who you mentioned, Carol, Bill Jackson, had spent several years in the Middle Hills in Nepal. And we came back and we had independently witnessed that large-scale restoration was possible and that it could yield real benefits for livelihoods and for environmental outcomes. So given that we were starting from a low base point, because restoration was considered really just in terms of tree planting for industrial plantations, we felt it was important to really start to rebuild the narrative around restoration and really reframe this in a way, in a manner that emphasized the importance of the sustained delivery of multiple goods and services, that highlighted the importance of a landscape perspective and the ability to work across different land use sectors. We played down the emphasis, which was common at that time, about win, 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 and everything was all this aspirational language about winning, everybody winning, and started to say actually what we needed to do was recognize that there were trade-offs, and we had to make those trade-offs explicit, but we had to find ways that they could be negotiated equitably and come out with good outcomes that could be balanced across different stakeholder groups. And I think that, as I say, we also really drew quite heavily from a lot of the thinking around participatory approaches and adaptive management. And so in 2000, a small group of us got together. We came up with the term forest landscape restoration and also the definition that we use today. And on that basis, we started to build a partnership to test and apply this framework in several different landscapes, from riparian restoration in Sabah to community forest restoration in Scotland, of all places. And that eventually led to the establishment of the Global Partnership in Forest Landscape Restoration in 2003. And I think maybe one of our first real measures of success happened when of going mainstream and getting mainstream buy-in was when the United Nations Forum on Forests actually held a ministerial roundtable on this very issue in 2005. Now, Carol, do you want me just to say what the role of the Bonn Challenge was in supporting that?
Yeah. Why don't you dive in with that now? That's great.
Because I think all this went very well. We really started building momentum, but by 2010, we realized that we were actually going to face a bit of a challenge, because we had good analysis. Horst mentioned we had a map of where restoration was needed, implemented or delivered by our friends at WRI. We had interest from governments. We had there was lots and lots of momentum taking place. But at the same stage, we also realized that we were stuck. We were still talking about the same old examples. We joke that Xinjiang in Tanzania and Lewis Plateau in China were getting overused so often. And what we'd failed to do was actually say, where are these new examples of restoration actually taking place? And we actually realized if we couldn't demonstrate that, if we couldn't demonstrate real tangible momentum building on that, frankly, this would be another beautiful idea that never got off the drawing board as such. So that's when we put our heads together, as Horst explained, with the German Environment Ministry and the person of Horst, and we had that famous phone call, and we really sort of started to say, how do we really inject a bit of ambition now? How do we start to get something that people can actually work to? And I personally do not think it's an exaggeration to say that the Bonn Challenge was instrumental in really providing that critical momentum so that FLR could take off and we could really start to show new examples of restoration everywhere. I think it gave the opportunity for those countries who were already ready to go, like the United States and like Rwanda. It gave them an opportunity for something to organize around, but it also gave us it also allowed us to start to engage with other countries and other interested parties as well. And I think that it was that framework that actually allowed us to bring in new pledges. We actually said right at the very start, if we could get past 20 million hectares in the first year, then that would give us the momentum. And indeed, thanks very much to our two colleagues, to Vicky and Jean-Pierre and their countries, that gave us that momentum. So I think, as I say, without the Bonn Challenge, we could have been stuck in a beautiful idea that didn't take root. But now I think that we've got it. It has given us this global target has given us the extra push for forest landscape restoration. We've been able to go from pilots to mainstreaming. It's given us a focus to really have a demand responsive support network to provide tools like the Rome assessment and the barometer, the learning exchanges that the US Forest Service has supported, and also actually mobilizing the resources to get restoration on the ground. It's given a framework for donors to align their national interests with and get greater profile on that. And I know certainly that's what Rwanda fed back. They knew they needed to get landscape restoration underway, but this gave them a useful international framework to adhere to. And finally, I think it gave us an opportunity really to establish national and subnational roadmaps that would really allow us to take things to scale. So to me, as I say, I think we had a great idea with forest landscape restoration. We built a compelling narrative, but if it wasn't for the Bonn Challenge, we wouldn't be up at this fantastic figure of 210 million hectares of commitments. And as we know from the barometer, that is being replicated with real hard delivery action on the ground that is conserving biodiversity, that's creating jobs, that is sequestering carbon. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much, Stuart. Then we're going to turn to Jean-Pierre and Vicky. Rwanda and the United States made really pivotal pledges. You know how people always ask questions like, where were you in that moment? Where were you when Kennedy was shot? Or where were you where were we when those pivotal pledges were announced? I can remember those moments so clearly. They really did change the game for forest landscape restoration. They really did. So Jean-Pierre, let's hear from you first, because Rwanda was the very first pledge to the Bonn Challenge, and we still talk about it. It's still notable because it was a border-to-border pledge. What do you think compelled this ambition? What was behind, what was the drive or becoming part of this global initiative?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and even for the invitation to this platform. Rwanda is a medium-sized country, and we have high rate of the population growth. From that, it's where we saw that if we want to feed our population on the limited land, because Rwanda is the size is not too big compared to other countries. And Rwanda also is a biodiversity sensitive country, because we take care of environment, also we take care of the nature, the biodiversity, because it's where we stabilize the economy through the tourism. And then from there, the country has taken that initiative to join directly with the Bonn Challenge, because we wanted first to feed our population. We want to conserve the nature, the natural forests, and even we want to feed our population through all the sense of the socio-economic aspects. Then from there, we saw that Rwanda is having high rate to be feeded from what they have around. Cutting trees, the harvesting of small woodrots was very high, and then the degradation from that harvesting was not. We can't limit that if we don't join this initiative Bonn Challenge. Then Rwanda saw that if we have to take that initiative, Once Bonn Challenge was initiated, Rwanda joined the first, because first of all, we wanted to limit the harvesting rate of the woodlots, of the smaller forests we had in Rwanda. We want to feed our population, and we want to take that initiative so that we can measure the progress from one point to another, and then come up with a sustainable way of managing our ecosystems. Then simply, I don't want to mention many things, but our initiative, our first step to this Bonn Challenge was to make sure that we restore the degraded land, and we take up the advantages, socioeconomic advantages of this Bonn Challenge. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's terrific. Before I will come back to you, and I think what we might do is go to Vicky now, and then I'll come back to both of you afterwards, so you could talk about what you would say to other countries, other pledgers, current and future. But for now, let's go to Vicky. So a year after Rwanda's pledge in 2012, at the People's Summit on the margins of Rio +20 Earth Summit, this 15 million hectare pledge was announced, really stunning, and was certainly our largest pledge at the time, and is still the second largest of them all, and also, as we know, one of the largest in terms of implementation. So what drove the Forest Service to join the Bonn Challenge, and do you think it's been useful to be a part of it?
Oh, absolutely, it's been useful. And you know, it's been said by Stuart and others, the Bonn Challenge was just the catalyst that the Forest Service, the US Forest Service needed. And yes, indeed, we did pledge the 15 million hectares by 2020. And I'm pleased to say by the end of 2020, we will have achieved 20 million hectares of restoration across the US forests. And you know, restoration just pays tremendous dividends. The healthy and resilience of our world's forests really affects all of us. Healthy forests are critical to the economic, the social, and the well-being of communities. We all know the benefits that healthy forests deliver in clean air and water, and habitat for native fish and wildlife, for forest products, for carbon storage, biodiversity, outdoor recreation, and you know, so much more. And we have many challenges here in the US with invasive species, record droughts, rising temperatures, and other stressors that really are threatening the health of our forests. And you know, we face longer wildfire seasons, bigger fires, and more acres burned. And so forest landscape restoration is increasingly an important tool for promoting the kinds of conditions that make forests resilient in the face of these catastrophic fires and other threats. And the Bonn Challenge just really catalyzed and allowed us to come together and share information, lessons learned, and the tools for successful landscape scale forest restoration. Because, you know, we're not alone in facing these emerging challenges. And by coming together in this collaborative way, the world's forests and the communities that rely on them benefit from our collective and combined knowledge and experience. So we're just really grateful and enthusiastic to be a part of this highlight. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. That's really great to hear and really inspirational. Jean-Pierre, let's go back to you for a moment then. What would you say to future potential pledgers?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we've had time to mobilize another countries, through different meetings and Congress. When you join Bonn Challenge, it's the only way to measure yourself about the degradation and how you are restoring your ecosystems. I think we had that time, but we can take this opportunity again to make sure that other countries, wherever they are, they have to at least to pledge, because if you don't pledge, then you don't go for those, for your pledges. Number one is to take up your pledge and put in the basket, so that globally, that from here to here, this is what we are restoring. I think from there, it's where you start improving your policies, and once you pledge, you start improving your policies. Make sure that you bring new species into restoration platforms. You make sure that you mobilize internal and external financing, because when you see the government of Rwanda, how they are putting money into restoration, it was not the case before. But once you put that targets in the basket with other countries, of course, the government can say, oh, this is what you have done. This is what we made as a pledge. And this is, we need to accomplish this pledge. Then we are mobilizing other people. We are mobilizing other countries. They are decision makers from all over the world. They have to join us today to make sure that we are making the better future, the better world of our children and our grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned some really important enabling or success factors there, and I wonder if Vicky might like to build on those for a minute. You mentioned the policies that you need in place and the budget allocations and things like that. And we know in the US, there was the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, which was one, not the only engine of the great implementation that we've seen. Are there some other factors, Vicky, similar to that, other enabling or success factors that you would highlight that other countries should think about?
Certainly would, Carol. You know, the partnerships and the collaboration are critically important because we can't just work within our own jurisdictions. We have to work across jurisdictions and bring together the diverse perspectives, because, you know, we need to create a shared community vision for restoration. And this in turn helps to build the public support for sustainable restoration while we ensure the collective social, economic, and each ecological needs are met. And, you know, it really is the acknowledgement that it's an investment. It takes time to build this effective community relationships, because that's how we're going to make a difference at scale. And we also learn the critical role of monitoring and adaptive management, and that plays into the social license as well, how important it is in our restoration work, as we together discover the tremendous potential of advances in, you know, geospatial technology and spatial analysis and other planning tools. We really are excited that we've moved beyond the project by project, hectare by hectare approach, and really lifted ourselves up to strategic landscape scale restoration. A lot of lessons and a lot of hard work to get there, but we're crossing boundaries, and we call it shared stewardship. And that embraces the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, as well as good neighbor authorities and many tools that Congress has given us, because we are showing we can make a difference thanks for the challenge, the Bonn challenge, and the collective coming together in a world setting.
That's great. Well, thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for that. I think that's going to be really helpful for other countries to hear about that, the importance of public support partnerships to ensure that restoration efforts not only get off the ground, but are successful and sustainable in the longer term. Now, we're just about out of time, but I'd like to take advantage of our technical team for a few more minutes, if we could, because we did have a question from our online audience that a couple of you might want to answer, which is about the biodiversity benefits of forest landscape restoration. Who would like to say a little bit more about how you see forest landscape restoration benefiting biodiversity? I see Vicky nodding, so if you want to.
Sure.
Go ahead, thanks.
Yeah, it's very exciting. You know, part of our restoration efforts in the U.S. is planting special vegetation to improve wildlife habitat and to enhance biodiversity. Our collaborative forest landscape restoration program, for example, we improved the habitats of over 70 different species of animals and plants, 18 of which were endangered or threatened. And our restoration efforts really reduce the catastrophic wildfire, which also enhances biodiversity by reducing the destruction of critical habitats for our endangered species. That's just a few examples of how this really is synergistic with biodiversity.
Great, thank you. Let's see, maybe Stuart, were you wanting to jump in on that as well?
Yeah, well, Sarah, I just entirely agree with what Becky said, and I won't repeat that. But I think the 2 points I would just like to make is, number one is the whole purpose of forest landscape restoration is to provide multiple benefits. So you actually, and that multiple benefits comes from the functionality that a diverse and a healthy ecosystem provides. So it's in our interest, in order to provide the carbon and the water and what you actually do need, I mean, that comes along with that is enhanced biodiversity as well. The second thing is, when we do these assessments to look at what the opportunities are, you identify other areas that may be ripe for protection. And if Jean-Pierre doesn't mind, I would like just to give one small example in Rwanda, where I had the privilege to work with the government in the early days. And as we did the assessment for restoration opportunity, we identified, I think it was Jean-Pierre, something like 110 or 113 remnant areas of Albertine forest that people didn't know were there. They were small areas, but immediately the government then were able to move and protect those as well. So I think there's opportunities both that actually helps enhance the protection of forests that is there already, but also say by the very fact you need enhanced you need biodiversity to supply these multiple functions. That also is also a vehicle for improved biodiversity management.
Thanks, Stuart. I don't know if Horst is waving. We're going to have to wrap up like within 2 minutes. So Horst and Jean-Pierre, if you have some last minute thoughts that you'd like to share.
Thanks, Karen. Yes, I fully agree with Vicky. Of course, also with Stuart on biodiversity. It is about improving the ecosystem, and the ecosystem is based on biodiversity. And I think this is a main topic and issue of any landscape restoration activity. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Jean-Pierre, any last words?
Thank you very much. My last word is to thank very much the fathers, or why not the mothers of Bonn Challenge. And as Rwanda, we promise to always support the initiative. We'll make sure that 2 million hectares of degraded land that should be rehabilitated up to 2030 will be achieved, because now we are at 35%. We will gear the efforts to make sure we make it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.
Well,
thank
you.
you.
Because, a great idea is nothing without the restoration champions in countries really making it happen. So it's really about you folks in the countries. Now, unfortunately, that's all the time we've got. I'd like to say huge thank you to our panelists. I wish we could talk for hours, and I'm thrilled that we've been recording everything, because I know I'm going to want to listen again, and I know lots of people will want to hear what you had to say. In an hour's time, we'll have our 6th live panel. That one will be about forest landscape restoration for COVID recovery. So very topical topic. So make sure you don't miss it. Many thanks again to everyone, and see you soon in the restoration community.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you very much.